Hello and welcome back to part 2. We're still talking about the larynx. I'm still talking, using my larynx, so kind of a fun, quirky idea there. We were talking about how you can tense your vocal cords and make yourself produce a higher pitch note. Resonance adds volume to the voice and is decided by the size of the chambers in the larynx. Some people just have natural resonance. They have a large volume within their larynx. I think of Abigail Burney. No, I'm just kidding. I love Abigail. She's great, but she just talks loud. I think part of that's just because she's just got a lot of resonance, and that's okay. It adds volume to the voice, and it's determined by the size of the chamber of a larynx. And lastly, articulation is the ability to make intricate sounds of speech. Now, a lot of times, articulation has issues when there's a variety of factors. Some of them are genetic. Some people are just more genetically prone to speak poorly and have poor articulation. Some people, it's just their raising. And so if your parents have a lisp, you will probably have a lisp too. But some people just can't make very definite sounds because of an issue involving their larynx. And the articulation of words is off. Alright, I'm going to move myself just a little bit down to where I don't matter. Left lung. Left lung is divided into two lobes by the oblique fissure. It's smaller than the right lung. Of course, your left lung is on the side where your heart is, and the left lung is smaller because it accommodates the heart. The cardiac notch is a place where the heart can actually rest within the space of the lungs. Of course, the lungs and the heart are very close by because they work together. Pulmonary circulation brings blood to and from the lungs so it can go to the body. The right lung is divided into three lobes by the oblique and horizontal fissure. And, of course, it's larger. And it is located more superiorly in the body due to the liver being on the right side. So it is higher, anatomically speaking, and larger because of the liver. Towards the midline, the lungs are separated from each other by the mediastinum, and it is a midline like range which separates the lungs. In relatively broad, rounded surface in contact with the thoracic wall is called the costal surface, of the lung. So it's the one that's in contact with the cardiac wall. So that would be what you would see here in pink, the more superficial portions of the lung. And I'm going to have to take a real quick break. I'll be right back. The computer randomly glitched. Sorry about that. Weird. Anyways. Thanks. Anyway, wow. We left off with the costal region, the thoracic wall. It is in contact with this costal region or surface of the lung. And then we also have the pleura. Now, these are very similar ideas. The pleura is the outer surface of each lung. Well, I thought the broad, rounded surface in contact, the outer wall, is the costal surface. Well, they're kind of related to each other, but the pleura deals with a specific membrane, the serous membrane, and the fluids contained within it. The outer surface of each lung is tightly covered by the visceral pleura, and the space between the serous membrane layers is called the pleural cavity. Now, the textbook goes into great detail about the the intricate differences between each of these things, I'd encourage you to look at it. Now, I'm not going to ask you on your test, what's the difference between the pleural cavity and the pleura? The pleural cavity is just the space of the pleura. The pleura is the membrane itself. And then there's a fluid, which makes it even worse. It's a thin serous pleural fluid. Circulates this cavity, acts as a lubricant, ensures minimal friction. So the lungs are expanding. They're rubbing the outside of your thoracic cage. And you don't feel it. Well, why? Because there's this soapy, almost sliding, friction-thin fluid. And sometimes there can be too much, which is what we call a pleural effusion, where we have fluid buildup in the between the lungs and the chest, and you can see how it builds up, it pushes against the thoracic cage, and it can cause some serious pain. Kind of feels, I've been described, it feels kind of like a heart attack, trouble breathing. You might think you have coronavirus with all that's going around. You can see a picture of this pleura, which is this serous membrane region. The lungs, of course, the different lobes, the alveoli. You can see where, you can see where there is a superior portion on the right lung to the left lung of the cardiac notch. How do lungs work? Air enters your lungs through a system of pipes called the bronchi, the alveoli, where gas exchange takes place in these little vessels, capillaries. We understand that. We've already talked a whole bunch about arteries, arterioles, capillaries, venules, and veins. It's important that the air in the alveoli and the blood and the capillaries are very close contact with each other because oxygen and carbon dioxide diffuse. This is important. The exchange is not necessarily directed by any one process or any one organelle. It happens naturally through diffusion. We're going to talk a little bit more about why. But of course, if there's nothing necessarily controlling it, it just happens naturally. If there's an issue with the space between oxygen and carbon dioxide, it's not going to happen well. That's not good. Breathing. During inhalation, the diaphragm contracts and the rib cage rises up. This expands the volume of the chest cavity. Pressure and volume directly related. Think Boyle's law. Pressure works inversely of volume. And the volume increases, the pressure decreases, air flows into the lungs because of the decrease in pressure. Things move from high pressure to low pressure. And the lungs fill with air. The carbon dioxide is exchanged for oxygen. The volume decreases, and the carbon dioxide is released in the atmosphere. And it also has to do actually with the atomic mass of carbon dioxide. If you remember, oxygen's atomic mass is 16 atomic mass units. That means oxygen, O2 is 32 atomic mass units. Carbon would make it 44. It also has to do with its mass, but we're not going to get too much into that. The chest cavity is sealed, creating a vacuum. Air rushes in. The intercostal muscles permit the movement of the ribs to allow for this air to rush in. We're going to end off this section, part 2 of your lecture, with diseases. And we're going to talk about a whole bunch of different diseases. The first one is emphysema. And emphysema can be generally categorized under what can be known as COPD. And COPD, actually I'm going to look it up with you. I was going to grab my phone, but, COPD. Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Mostly from tobacco, increases the likelihood of bronchitis and emphysema. It blocks airflow, irreversible damage, breathing difficulty, cough, mucus, wheezing. Is COPD a fatal disease? Not good. Puts their health in jeopardy. Anyway, within emphysema, the walls of the alveoli degenerate. Many alveoli will join together into one large alveolus. So you can see here how 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 countable alveoli. Now there's 5. And maybe 6. And so they kind of join together, the walls break down, less exchange, less surface area, not good. Decrease in surface area causes less oxygen to be exchanged with blood. Alveolar fluid moistens the lungs, creates surface tension, and the surface tension causes there to be a more rounded shape. To increase the surface area, fails to do so. Think about, let's say, if you've ever had like a water droplet hang on to something, maybe like a sink. It's hanging on because there is only a smaller surface area. The larger the surface area, you're not gonna have this massive chunk of water hanging off the surface of a pipe, because it has to work with small surface area. Pneumothorax is air in the pleural cavity, leading to a collapsed lung. So pleural cavity is supposed to be vacuum sealed, only with pleural fluid. You get air in that pleural cavity, your lung collapses. The pleural cavity is supposed to be vacuum sealed. Surfactant is a molecule which is produced by the lungs to maintain the vacuum. And of course, most of you already know, and we've already talked about the fact that infants that are born 36 weeks or less have functional heart, functional liver, thyroid, all the things you really need, even a stomach and small intestine. Their lungs aren't as developed as they should. And normally they have to go into oxygen. So we have some really unique ways of dealing with that kind of stuff. To the point that I think currently babies born after the 24th week are most of the time there's a greater percentage of survival, which is pretty incredible. But infant respiratory distress syndrome is found in premature babies because there's very little production of surfactant before 4 weeks before birth. If surfactant is a molecule produced by the lungs to maintain the vacuum, there's no vacuum in an infant's lung, and the vacuum does not allow the volume to be increased, the pressure to decrease, so air can rush in to an infant's lung. And a lot of times the baby actually has a okay chance at inhaling, but exhaling is extremely hard because it loses the vacuum seal. It would almost be like the fact that you can inflate a tire that is got a hole in it, but it's going to deflate, and it's very easy to inflate, but it's very hard to keep from deflating. Of course, that analogy breaks down when you're talking about the lungs. But anyway, that's part 2. We're going to get back with part 3, and we'll get back with that tomorrow. Talk about a little bit more diseases, and so I'll see you guys later.